Welcome to Coming About with David Paragamian, the podcast that dives deep into the minds of leaders who have transformed their businesses and industries, paving the way for a better future. Here's Dave.
My first guest is Chris Kuenne, who is a person who has worn so many hats in his career. I can't wait to dive in and chat with him, but just to set the stage for you as the listener, Chris has been a brand manager of one of the largest brands in the US. He's been a consultant. He's been a founder and CEO of a successful advertising agency that became so successful it was sold to one of the large holding companies, Publicis, for $500 million. He's a professor. He's a chairman of a new platform company. So many interesting things in Chris's journey, and particularly, as I'm always interested in, the pivots, those moments when he changed direction, tried new things, has done new things. So Chris, welcome to Coming About. Looking forward to speaking with you.
Thanks, Dave. I really hope my mom hears this, because that kind of introduction is the kind of thing that all sons want their mothers to hear. So thank you for those very flattering remarks.
Well, if she's not listening, I'll make sure that I get a copy of the tape to her. Well, thanks for being on board. Maybe let's start at the beginning, Chris. You know, after graduating from business school, I know that you spent the better part of a decade learning the craft of brand management at Johnson & Johnson. Can you talk a little bit how that was a foundational element for you on this journey?
Absolutely. I think that product management, or brand management as it was referred to in our era, is really one of the best ways to begin a career if your intention is to ultimately build, lead, and expand an organization, whether that's a for-profit or nonprofit organization. Because the brand manager really is the P&L owner, and there's nothing more sobering and focusing than being responsible for the revenue and expense of a business. So it was just a terrific way to start a career and start to build the skills that ultimately would lead to building larger organizations.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I know when I started my career at Procter & Gamble, they talked about brand management is general management. So exactly that point that you're making, that you're the hub of the wheel with all of these connected spokes of the organization. Can you tell me a little bit about, because I know your journey then took you into consumer motivation and why people act and why they buy and why they're loyal to brands. What was it during your tenure managing a number of different big brands for Johnson & Johnson, including Band-Aids, Tylenol, Sesame Street vitamins, I recall you were on, as you progressed through the J&J organization and worked and led all these brands, what was it that was the consumer behavior aspect that got so exciting for you?
Yeah, I always found the question of what motivates the consumer to buy or not buy the brand, to be price or promotion sensitive or not, to be the core insight a brand manager or franchise leader can then translate into better strategy to ultimately win the game. Like you, and perhaps galvanized in the shared high school we both went to, I think one of the most fun things about marketing is it's a zero-sum competitive game. Every tenth of a market share point you take from your competition not only is a win for you, but also puts you in a stronger position. And I once heard early in my career that the art and science of a product manager is she or he who can derive deeper insights, convert those into better programs faster, better than your competition. And so I was drawn to the why question of marketing very early on and used it really in each of my brand management assignments to restructure, reconceptualize, reposition brands for growth. And so I can't really explain why it happened, why the why happened. But it really was something incredibly appealing to me, because a little bit like a battle, the battlefield knowledge of where your competition is and where you stand really can make the difference as to whether you win or lose that battle. And I see marketing very much in that same context.
So let me grab that thought about trying to understand the why consumers act the way they do, why they buy, they repurchase, they switch brands, or they don't. and the metaphor I'll use is because I've been so steeped in the healthcare business all of my career, it almost sounds, Chris, like, in healthcare, originally, we could take an X-ray, and that was the best radiographic evidence we had to take a look at your lungs or your spine or whatever. And of course, as we all know, technology has leapt forward. And so now when a clinician really wants to get a good diagnosis, he or she is able to go way beyond just an X-ray. We can get an MRI, we can get a CAT scan with imaging, so that we can dive deeper and really understand beyond just that surface level. One of the things that I know, and I'd love to pivot to, is the company that you founded, Rosetta, is a company that was not just about surface level insights, not the X-ray level insights. This was a business and an agency that was founded on, let's get to the CAT scan or to the MRI level insights so that we can really understand how this consumer is different than that consumer and what they do. Tell me a little bit about what was the catalyst idea for you for Rosetta.
Sure. Yeah, it really was spawned by work at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business in the early 80s. The idea was called single source data. And a terrific guy named Len Lodish really was I think, the godfather of the idea that you could close the loop between marketing stimulus, price, promotion, product place, and brand choice. And this caused both Nielsen and IRI to develop panels that allowed you to look at a sample of consumers in a given category, such as the pain reliever category, and identify all of the potential stimulus for outcome and then all of the outcomes. What's happened over the last really 40 years since that original idea was developed is that our analytic techniques and research techniques allow us, similar to the march from X-ray to CAT scan, the technology continues to progress so that we can understand the relationship between cause and effect. And for a guy who's sort of curious about the why of consumer choice, it's been an incredible honor and fascinating journey as the data gets better, the techniques get better, and ultimately there's greater clarity. I will put a footnote on this, though, and that is that today's digital marketers have not been trained on the question of why. And I'm very troubled by this now as a kind of senior member of the marketing community, because they often believe that you can just test or experiment your way to a level of understanding, which is not really true. It would be a little bit like, I'm not sure where in your body it hurts, so I'm just going to continue to hit you with the CAT scan from your toenails down to your hair follicles, and eventually we'll find what ails you. And so I think we're at a very interesting juncture as we take all of the data and all of the techniques and hopefully the right question, which is, why did that consumer buy that brand? Or why does that consumer share his or her requirements across 3 brands using different brands in different circumstances? We're now in a position to understand that, but ironically, the tools are ahead of the users. And I think one of the key lessons that you and I and our generation have to share or should share with the younger members of the marketing community is, don't forget how important the why question is, and keep asking it until you're certain that you understand brand choice.
Yeah, I other than the fact that you called us senior members of the community, unfortunately, for the listener, it invokes certain gray-haired images. But I'll dispatch with that part. But I think your part about the really understanding the why gets to one of my sort of personal pet issues here with brand management and marketing today, right? Which is, so many folks want to jump to the end result, the creative surface that they can't wait to produce and put into the marketplace. It is attractive. It is sexy. It is fun to shoot commercials. It is fun to see them on broadcast television and in other surfaces. But it's the homework up front. It's really understanding the customer, understanding the segments of the customers and how this customer is very different than that customer, even though demographically they may look the same. Their behaviors are very different. And I think it's that homework piece that you're talking about. And it sounds like that was one of the core tenets of what the Rosetta agency was all about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, I've never been a creative. I think the best creatives do their best work when they have a brief that addresses the question of who are we talking to, why and in what context do they make a brand decision, and what is there, as you and I were trained, the accepted consumer belief? What is it that that consumer believes before he or she is introduced to the message or the offer or the product? And so in order to create great communication, you really need to do exactly what you said, which is to do the homework. And when you do the homework, that allows you to build the better brief that builds the better communication. But there's one other really important and sort of dirty little secret that everybody likes to quote. The famous John Wanamaker, I know that half my advertising doesn't work. I just don't know which half. The reality is that about 95% of advertising doesn't work, partly because there's only about a third of an addressable market that's actually going to respond to a given brand's positioning and messaging. So a very important part of this process is answering the who question. Who is it that we are trying to influence with our communication or our program? And then be wickedly disciplined in speaking just to their hot buttons, not letting it spill out to everybody else because it'll be far less compelling.
Right. No, that is truly next level marketing. I wonder if, just to make sure we don't get you and I too far down the marketing brand manager rabbit hole here, I want to pull us back up a level here about the company that you created and founded and ultimately sold to Publicis, Rosetta. I know that that's a business that in initial stages you were heavily focused in the healthcare vertical, but that ultimately when that business, after a decade and was sold to Publicis, it was a business that had verticals in financial services and consumer packaged goods and automotive and healthcare and pharmaceuticals. And I wonder whether, you could help us from the entrepreneurial standpoint. Sometimes I think people think that the entrepreneur has a playbook from day one that ultimately gets played out over 10 years. And I know sometimes life is a little more serendipitous than that. I guess we'll never know whether Jeff Bezos really intended to sell more than books or not. But I wonder, when you started Rosetta and you started applying this to the business that you knew so well, having come from Johnson & Johnson, were there any ahas or pivot points that took you to some of these other verticals? I'm really interested in this moment of the pivot, the decision making to tack into these other areas.
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. And there were really two growth vectors to Rosetta. And just to kind of put it in context, it took us about 8 years to get to $10 million. And it took us about 5 more years to get to $250 million. So the two moments of truth were, first, the realization that this technique we had developed, and it was really a consulting technique that we branded personality-based segmentation, and as you said, started in healthcare, we discovered pretty quickly that it applied equally well to other verticals where the market had a broad range of preferences which drove the economics of that customer. And as soon as we discovered that not only does it work in healthcare, but as you said, it works in financial services and consumer technology and consumer packaged goods, that was one growth vector, moving across verticals. The other growth vector, which makes kind of a fun story, is a moment when my co-founder, Kurt Holstein, and I returned to the office after we had both taken the red eye back from different clients on the West Coast, one actually in the middle of the country, one on the West Coast. And we had both discovered that the segmentations that we were building were being picked up by, ironically, a leading agency from Publicis called Digitas. And we were generating somewhere in the order of $1 million or $2 million for AT&T Wireless and Allstate. And Digitas was charging that client close to $20 million, each of them, $20 million a year to actually implement our segmentations. So with our third cup of coffee, we walked into one another's office and said, oh my gosh, Look at all this money we're leaving on the table. And within a couple of years, we then did one of the scariest things any entrepreneur could do, and many smart ones never would, which is we mortgaged our houses to make our first acquisition. We personally guaranteed a $10 million loan to buy a $10 million agency. And our $10 million consulting firm and their $10 million agency 18 months later was $45 million in revenue, demonstrating the power of integrating this kind of consulting insight with agency implementation. And then the story went on from there. So the kind of key takeaway is first, don't mortgage your house. No, the key takeaway is that identify your growth vectors. For us, they were to move across verticals and down the marketing stack. And then either through luck or hard work or private equity funding, which we eventually brought into our firm, but the first deal was actually personally funded. Capture as much of the value you're creating as you can. And what we learned in that moment of discovering Digitas taking 80% of the value that we were creating by generating the digital marketing, what we discovered was the form of our value, in other words, a research and consulting deck, was a very poor way to capture the value inherent in our product. We actually had to, as Jeffrey Moore speaks about it in Crossing the Chasm, we had to create the whole product. In other words, not just the insights, but also the marketing implementation to capture the value that we were creating.
Well, if I were being cheeky, I would say that the credit really goes to United Airlines and the really crummy ride you had in seat 11C all the way from LA to Newark. But, to be less cheeky, there's another very humble, you didn't bring it up, but there's another great insight for entrepreneurs in there, which was the belief, the fact that you and Kurt would mortgage your homes that your families were living in order to double down so that you could expand the business into not only the intellectual consulting part, but the creative surfaces part for the clients. That took great belief that the personality-based segmentation was a differentiator. It was what marketers needed. And so I wonder if for the listener that the real takeaway here is that it was not only a great idea, but then it was that moment where, and I certainly feel this way about my own personal and professional life, sometimes you just need to tack into the wind because you believe it's the right thing to do. You know it's not going to be easy, but it's the right thing to do, and you have to do it.
It's so true. When you think about what are the core elements of entrepreneurial success, kind of in rank order, the first one is clearly luck. And the older I get, the more I realize that I guess it's sometimes referred to as lady luck. Luck is so important, and luck sort of bleeds then into timing and context. But those things are really less in your control. The things that are in your control are the thing you're putting your finger on, which is conviction. The more businesses I look at, the more entrepreneurs that I coach, the more I see that conviction is really the fuel to allow you to run through incredible friction. To mix the metaphor here, it empowers you to run through fire over and over and over again. And we did have that conviction. And we believed that not only were we, the name of the company, Rosetta, it was the stone, the ability to translate one understanding into multiple understandings. And we really believed and discovered early on that we needed to not only translate a deeper understanding of the consumer, but we actually had to deliver the marketing to achieve the business results that the insights really deserve to generate. So I guess for your entrepreneurial listeners, the idea of developing conviction and then really sticking with it. And when I say conviction, that doesn't mean develop a point of view and just kind of follow it out the window. It takes a lot of review and debate and experimentation. But once you lock into a conviction, seeing it all the way through is incredibly powerful. I'll just share a quick anecdote that many of your listeners may know, but Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks, when he raised the money to start to scale Starbucks, he went to something like 80 different investors and only had 4 ultimately give him a few $100,000 to allow him to expand Starbucks. I'm sure all of us would love to have been one of those 4 investors. So the firmness of his conviction after seeing what coffee and the role coffee played in the culture in Italy, and then bringing it back to the U.S., he was so certain. And now look at it, 2 or 3 times he's gone back into the CEO role to return that business to its dead center. And that just takes a conviction and a form of leadership that is rare, but I think a crucial ingredient.
Yeah, and I want to get into the difference with you, Chris, between leadership and management. But we have to put a pin in it, and we have to stop here. Coming up in my second part of my conversation with Chris Kuenne, the founder of Rosetta and Rosemark, Chris will share why every leader needs a mentor.
I encourage everyone to find the mentor for the moment that they're working through, and it can just be enormously powerful in your personal and professional development.
This has been Coming About. We hope these conversations have left you feeling empowered and ready to take your organization to the next level. To speak with Dave about your business transformation or to learn more about Health Monitor Network, go to healthmonitornetwork.com. And don't forget to check out his book, Coming About: How We Transformed a Major Media Company and the Lessons There for You. Available wherever books are sold. Coming About with David Paragamian is a production of Advantage Audio.